Super excited. I'm joined by Dylan. We are going to be talking about a subject I'm pretty sure we're both pretty passionate about, market absorption analysis. And I just wanted to kick this off first by saying I remember very specifically where we were the very first time I heard this. You taught this to me sitting at the old Ankeny office around that yellowy gold oblong oval table on our weekly new agent meetings. And I just remember it was super impactful. I felt so much more confidence to go have really great confidence or great conversations with my sellers. So I don't know, I'm just really excited to have everyone get to hear what I got to hear 10 plus years ago now. So thanks for joining.
It's been a while since I've talked through this though, so hopefully I'm not too rusty. I do remember that room very clearly though, the oval
Yeah,
table. That was a lot of good memories around that table. A lot of good
yeah,
agents around today
yeah.
that spent a lot of time
We had
getting
a
there.
pretty good crew. It was fun. I really loved that. I was very fortunate and lucky to have that too. So I want to go through three different things today. One definitely being that whole journey story, because that's what really stuck in my brain. But I kind of want to start a little bit by picking your brain on where this started for you and how it's been really impactful or does help agents have good conversations. So, and I honestly don't think I know this. Where did this part start? Where did market absorption start for you?
Yeah, it takes me back to my years selling 2000, like two, three, four, five, six, seven is kind of when I stepped out of actual active selling. I
Yeah.
just remember a time where the market was different then. Lots of open houses, lots of activity. It was a buzz. Everyone was trying to buy housing because the dream of home ownership was just super high on the list, and there was the beginnings of government intervention. But man, the question was, how's the market? And I was young. I was in my early 20s, and the answer was always just, yeah, it's good. Lots of activity. And I was listing a lot of property and having engaging conversations about my marketing practices. But looking back, I realized I just had no real understanding of what the question, what's the market like, meant.
Yeah.
Because at that point, the market was kind of like it's been for a few years now. It was just cooking along and it didn't really matter. And so I started to realize that there was a deficit there. And Joe and I think it would have been 2000 and probably nine, maybe 10. We were at a conference for a couple of yahoos. The guys, it's Kinder Reese. I
Okay.
wouldn't recommend them hugely. Michael Kinder was the number one Coldwell Banker agent in the country, and we went to one of their conferences. And I remember them walking through a data narrative in
Okay.
their listing presentation, and my jaw just kind of dropped as I was watching this. I'd never heard of the term market absorption or uh,
Knew what it
on
was. And
supply.
yeah, yeah,
No, I
yeah.
hadn't been confronted with it. But right away, there was a light switch that went off. And the light switch was around the notion of the numbers not being about the numbers anymore. The numbers were a story. And so they had a little framework for that. And we borrowed some of that, tweaked it over the years, and built out what we've got today. But essentially, it's the same idea. How do you take numbers
Yeah.
and use the data, maybe in like a zooming down to the hyper local level,
Hmm.
but how do you use numbers as a mechanism to tell a story? Because what we know is that people don't think in numbers. Weird people think in numbers, like accountants and actuaries.
Yeah.
Normal people think in
Still
story,
story, right?
narrative.
Understand it. Yeah.
So that's really the impact here. And um, I think just for reference, I think there's some not definitions, but just understanding of why these numbers matter as much as they do.
Yeah, that's good.
I mean, if you get down to it, we all know this. Those of us that did any kind of economics or anything like this, the fundamentals of pricing, which is really what we're talking about here with the seller, the
Yeah.
fundamentals of pricing always come down to supply and demand. And
Mhm.
so, in a way, there's two, three, or four numbers that really, really matter to good storytelling with a seller. And one is always going to be supply. And supply isn't about supply. Supply isn't about inventory, right? Supply is about competition. Are you competing with lots of people or are you competing with a few people?
Mhm.
And that has to be the first framework for our story is how many people are also trying to sell something right now because that's going to drive pricing. Then
Yep.
on the other side, there's another number that matters, and that's going to be our demand, and that's best captured, I guess, by just sales volume,
Yep.
right? how many people are actively buying right now.
Yep.
And the best way to measure that's just going to be against, well, what sold last year, what sold last month compared to what was selling before. And that's going to capture how many people want whatever is available right now. And if you
Yep.
combine those two data points, what you really get is month supply. What you get is the absorption analysis.
Yep.
And so what I love about this is several things. One, we're going to tell a story, and that's going to help us engage in a consultative pricing conversation with our seller. Everybody else is going to show up and bring a CMA,
Yes.
and we're going to bring a CMA too. But the problem with a CMA is by definition a commodity. It's the
Yep.
most commoditized thing we do as realtors. In fact, if you call someone and say, "Hey, I want to list your house," they invite you over. They can almost predict that they might even say you could do a comparative market analysis
Yeah.
on my
Right.
home.
Yeah.
Even the consumers know what this is, and so um, it's hyper commoditized. It's also largely irrelevant. It's just a set of averages that you select. So it's only as accurate as the properties you pick.
Yeah.
And agent A might pick some really, really high properties in
Yeah.
order to boost the seller's confidence and buy the listing. And you, agent B, might be really, really accurate and careful and intentional about your comps and lose
But
the listing as a result of that.
yep.
So step number one here is we want to enter into consultative conversation with our clients. We don't want to lose the listing by coming
Right.
in and saying, "Here's what I think the property is worth." We want to
Mm-hmm.
engage in a conversation with the seller where we can meet in the middle and we can inform and educate them so that we can catch them up to some things we understand, create a common language,
Yep.
and then enter into a fun back and forth about not how to price the property, but rather where we need to position the property in order to achieve the best outcome, which is always going to be selling the property in the quickest amount of time at the highest possible price.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
that's the game we're playing here is we're using data to tell a better story to create a consultative context
Yes.
to engage in a pricing decision where we're not being chosen or not chosen based upon the price we recommend. We're being chosen because by the end of this conversation, the seller's entered into a dynamic relationship with us where they're not saying, "Do I like or not like the price you recommended?"
Yeah.
They're deliberating with us, with the
Mm-hmm.
data being the central focus.
Yeah, I think the two key things I remember being super impactful in that space. But one, I love the backstory. I just have to go back to that for a second. I feel like you had the same moment that I had
Oh,
when you
yeah.
presented this. It was like, oh,
I
okay.
need to tell a story.
Yeah, it was so impactful that way. And two, my favorite two things in the what we're trying to accomplish here is I love using the word position. You're empowering them by bringing them on this storytelling journey to be able to make their own decision. You're not telling with numbers, you're empowering them to think about their positioning and how they want to go about making the best decision for how they want to proceed. So that's the position versus price was really, really, really powerful for me
Which
too, as far
happens passively in the mind of the seller. You're not actively changing their thinking, but you passively, just by leading them down that
as yes,
conversation, there is a fundamentally different relationship compared to the three people they met with before. In
yes,
those other contexts, the context was, what are you going to tell me? And am I going to like it or not like it?
yep,
Whereas now we really are starting with, look, my job's not to tell you what to list your home for. That's your call. There's probably a price at which I would say, I'm not sure I want to take the listing because
yeah.
I want to be honest with you and I don't want to lie to you and I don't want it's a waste of your and my time to have the property sit in the market. But I do believe there's a range in which you can choose to position your property that might slow down the sale and maybe increase the potential for gain or
Right.
speed up the sale. And we need to talk through the strategy. Now, let's get to the strategy in a minute. What I
Yes,
want to
but
start with is just some of the information to put us in a spot to make some strategic decisions together. Does that sound good to you? To which they
ab
say, well, heck yeah,
yeah,
that sounds very good to me. That's very different than what I've done so far with your colleagues.
yeah, that's so good. So I think that's the perfect segue, honestly, into let's tell the story. So let's start. I'll just kind of turn it over to you. This is a little bit of role play, a little weird in this context, but really, really powerful. So yeah, so you've gotten them on the same page with you. They want to hear the story. Get
I'm trying to think what other context is necessary. I
Yeah,
think the presumption here is we've talked about our marketing value proposition, or maybe that's coming
tour of
later.
the home for sure, yep.
This is yeah, okay. So we've got the rest of the stages set. This is specifically the portion of the conversation that's going to be about pricing.
Yeah.
Um, so and I'm going to role play a little bit, but I think I also don't want to
Right,
go too in depth. So let's just set the stage for a pricing conversation.
yeah,
My first recommendation, I guess the tee up that I just gave you, right? Let's have a conversation about the information so that you're in a position to decide how you
yes,
want to position your property to maximize your return. Now, I'm assuming that you want to get it sold in a good amount of time. You don't want it to sit for a long time. And I'm assuming that you want to maximize price. Good so far? Yes. So
yes.
here's what I'd like to do. If I mean, I need about 10, 15 minutes. I just want to talk through some of the information that I've got in the back of my brain so that we can have a conversation about the strategy of how we want to go about pricing the property. And where I always want to start is I want to start with just some context at the national level. And what
Yep,
my recommendation to people is you can pull the from NAR the
mhm,
existing home sales report every
yep,
single month that comes out. That's going to give you sales volume. It's going to give you inventory levels nationally, and it's going to give you some pricing data. But remember, the first thing I want to cover with the seller is where we are in the context of the nation right now. And
yes,
so the way I would go about that is say, look, let's just start at the highest possible level in the US right now. You've probably heard a lot about the real estate market. There's been a lot of changes. Here's just a few small things I want you to know about where we are today. One, let's start with inventory. And you probably hear that thrown around a lot. Here's what we've seen. Right now, we're sitting, and then you can pull your data from Altos, you can pull it from NAR.
yep,
I'm looking at the NAR existing home sales report. The number is 1.15 million single family homes on the market. And I'm just going to contextualize that. So, nationally, guys, we're sitting with about 1.1 million homes that are currently for sale. And that's actually up about 20% from just a year ago. So that's our first point of reference. There's more homes for sale than there were a year ago, and there's more than there were the year before that. So inventory is increasing. Second data point, sales right now nationwide are, well, they're kind of in the middle right now. We're coming from a context where 3 years ago, we were selling around 6 million homes nationwide, and that dropped all the way down to five and then all the way down to four, which is about a 30% decrease in sales nationwide. Now, the good news is that in October, November, and December of last year, those numbers did start to pick up. But contextually, right now we have inventory starting to rise nationwide, and we do have sales that have actually been slightly suppressed. You've probably heard why: interest rates, and we'll probably get into that in the future. There's one more number I want to share with you before we zoom into your local level, and that's going to be this idea of month supply or absorption. And that's going to come up for us because it's really what we're going to focus on together. But here's what you need to know. We're coming from, first of all, a set of norms. The norms in the marketplace is that a balanced market, and I've got it here for you on this little picture, a balanced market has about 6 months supply, maybe 5 or 6 months today. And where we're coming from is a space where we've had about 1 or 2 months supply nationwide. And let me define that for you real quick. Month supply is simply at the current rate of sale, how long would it take for buyers to eat up all the inventory that exists if no more listings showed up? Today, where we're at is that we're sitting at about a 3.5 month supply nationwide. So that's our reference point that I want to remember. I'm just going to write it down here. We're sitting at about 3.3 months supply. And just for reference, a year ago, that was at 3.1 months. And 2 years ago, that was at 2.7 months. So what that tells us is sales are going down, inventory is going up. It's taking a little bit longer for the market to be able to buy everything off the shelf. So that's our national data for context. Any quick questions there before I move to what's going on in our marketplace? And that
yeah,
took me, what, 3 or 4 minutes?
yep,
You can make it more succinct. What helps is having that packaged and put together
yep,
and have a few pieces of paper to reference super quick. Your hyper analytical engineer is going to ask 50 questions, and people that just want to get the property sold are going to say, makes sense, keep moving. And you got to read the audience. So
yep,
Do I need to stop there or keep going?
I think we're good. I think we're good on that. I think that the national picture, because that's what they hear on the news. That's why it's important to
Yes.
reference it to give them a little bit of a, oh, okay, this is how we're saying we're different now from what I'm hearing on the news. It's really important.
I think that's the first reason I'm bringing up national. Excuse me. The second reason is I'm just trying to create some benchmarks. I'm just
Yep.
looking for reference points. So our reference points now is sales are actually down by 30%.
Yep.
Next reference point, inventory is up by 20%. I created two markers there. And then
Yep.
I created a 3.3 month supply. So I've got something against which to reference because it's
Yep.
all going to be about what we're comparing it to.
Yep.
So the
Exactly.
next thing I would say is, guys, obviously that's the national data and that matters and doesn't matter. So let's just zoom in real quick to where we are. And where we are is obviously in the Des Moines Area Association of Realtors. So I've got a piece of paper here to show you that I put together for you. Obviously, feel free to claim it. And I just want to show you what's going on in our MLS and
Mhm.
specifically in our price point. So I'm just
Mhm.
going to zoom in, and I think for the sake of our comparison today, Angela, you've got about a $470,000 property here that we're going to look at. So I'm going to assume that's the price point we're at.
Mhm.
Um, and I'm just going to say, okay, guys, I'm just going to highlight this line. Here's where we're at right now in your marketplace. Right now, in our price point, there's about 233 active listings
Better resale.
um, that are resale. There's about 520 that are new construction. So this is important to us because what we know is that half of what's for sale right now is brand spanking new and
Mhm.
probably has some of the updates that we talked about your property maybe doesn't have. So obviously this is highly contextual, but I'm building the story now, right? And whatever's true of the data is what I'm going to point out. Right now, there's 86 pendings, which represents a number that's of interest to me. It's the we call it the pending ratio. It's about a 37% pending ratio. This is the number of pendings we have relative to the number of active listings. Now, what this tells me is that this price point is kind of a moderately. It's not weak. It's not strong. We see
Mhm.
these up to 50 or 60% pending ratios, sometimes as high as 100. We'll come back to this number maybe later. Then what I want to look at is what's happened here recently in the last month. And so here's December's data. There were 57 properties in Des Moines Area Association that sold in our price range. And there's currently a 4.1 month supply. Now, remember, this is slightly higher than what we've seen nationally. And so that'll be important for us down the line. And it's taking about 48 days on average for properties to receive an offer in this price point. Guys, that's important to point out, by the way, so we
Yeah.
start to set expectations for timeline.
Yep.
That's super crucial because right away I've put an anchor in their brain that all of these sold in a day, sold in a week. I'm starting to already mitigate some of those thoughts.
Yep.
But in the last 12 months, let's take a look at this data because that might be slightly different than what happened last month. 992 sales, great news. There's a lot of properties selling still in this price range, about 82 a month. And over the last 12 months, on average, there's been a 2.8 month supply. So that's a relatively strong data point for the price point. But
Yeah.
remember, this is looking at all of the Des Moines Area Association right now and a 45 days on market. So, any questions from you guys on that data? Because what I'm going to do next is I want to zoom all the way in now, not just to your neighborhood, but I want to start looking at this same set of information as it relates to your property and its specific competition. And then maybe pause for a second for any questions.
Yeah. So good. Yeah, that
So,
one is just good context, right? And I usually even draw the map in their head of how big DMAR is and how much it covers. I'll say it goes all the way up to Ames, even properties,
good.
Newton, and I give an idea of how much ground that those numbers kind of cover.
Yeah. So, and maybe take this down before we keep
Yeah,
moving. I,
absolutely.
I, I really feel like that piece of paper is one of the more powerful resources we
So good.
have. I think our agents have not maybe, it's been a while since we've trained them on how to actively use that.
Hmm.
But again, just to set the stage of where we're at, um, I've created some benchmarks at the national level. I've What's so beautiful about this process is it's truly organic. I'm not trying to guide them anywhere that isn't the truth.
True.
So
Yes.
one of two things or three things or four things is going to happen. What we're going to see here is data that is better or worse or the same as the national data. These are just benchmarks for reference point. And the story will start to unravel as we move
Yeah.
forward. Now, one point of super importance here, you must have looked at this long before this presentation,
Oh yeah.
and you must have thought this through. And what's going to have helped you do that is the preparation of your actual local, hyper local market absorption analysis.
Your brain should already be going formulating, ooh, I'm gonna have to, this isn't gonna be good news for them, honestly, or this is gonna be great news for them. Your brain has to kind of already know where you're gonna land.
Which is
Yeah.
interesting because a good way to think of that is, I mean, not only are we telling a story to this seller in order to help guide them to a strategic decision making point, we've done the homework up front.
Yeah.
And so, presumably, we've had that same journey. We also think in stories. We've had to already start to think tactically and strategically about how we're going to go about actually marketing this property.
Yeah.
So,
Absolutely.
guys, what I've got for you here is something I call a market absorption analysis. You've probably heard of a CMA, and I've got one of those for you. But I really don't want to put that in front of you because you've probably seen others. Because the truth is, a CMA is only as accurate as the four comps that people put into them. So, what I want to do instead is just talk you through data that I've pulled for you specific to your property and how it compares to its local competition. So you'll notice at the top here, and yeah, Angela, just I guess move through this with me. Just for reference, I'm not scrolling here, you are.
I know I'm in charge, a little weird. Yeah.
So your property is 123 Made Up Street. I've got your assessment sheet here, and we'll look at the CMA here in a minute, maybe. But here's what we need to know about your property, and now not just all of DMAR, but specifically Grimes, because obviously what's going on in Grimes is going to matter. And then we're going to zoom even further in to your local competition. So first of all, let's just start with Grimes. There's currently 117 properties on, sorry, there's 117 properties that have sold here in the last 12 months. And that I'm going to compare to what happened the previous 12 months, which was around 110. So here's a piece of good news. It looks like sales are up about 6% compared to a year
Where?
ago.
Yep.
The other number I want to look at for you is days on market. Now, remember what I showed you is that in DMAR, there's about a 48 days on market. Well, in Grimes, what we're looking at is 83 is the amount of time, 83 days that it's taking on average to receive an offer on properties in your market. And that's kind of holding steady compared to a year ago. So it takes a little longer on average. Now, that doesn't mean some properties aren't selling in a day. It just means those ones have to be priced very, very aggressively. Next thing I want to say here is for all properties in our marketplace, the average property is priced at around 469. That's up about 2% a year ago. Now, the reason this matters, folks, is we've had a lot of crazy appreciation in the last few years. What we're seeing is in Grimes, that is steadying very similarly to what's gone on nationwide. So we've only seen about 2% appreciation in the last year. And pause, that's super important because we don't, what's gone in these people's minds in relation to what they think their property is worth from 2 years ago when they bought it. This is going to, right away, you're watching the facial expressions. You already know what questions might be coming up. But I'm, again, anchoring this data. If they want to argue about price, they can argue with the data, but they don't need to argue with me. I'm just the one putting the data on the table. Okay, then average sold price, guys, we're sitting at around 467. Now, what you'll notice is that's almost at asking price. So we're seeing about 100% list to sell price ratio on these properties, even though they're sitting for 83 days. Now, what I'm going to suggest to you, based on some of the data I've looked at, is most of that has got to do with the amount of new construction selling in Grimes. So again, guys, you're going to have looked at the information. You're going to have looked at the comps. I didn't do that on this, by the way. This is your
But
listing
you are correct.
from November. But I
But you
know
are
enough about the market, even though I don't sell. I know enough to know that the reason that number's there is because of the new construction
Yep.
ratio inside of Grimes, which I'm guessing is way more than 50%, right, Angela?
Yes. Yep, it is. Correct.
Okay, a year ago, properties were selling at about 99%. And so what you'll see is that sold prices also appreciated by about 2%. So good and bad news here. Good news, sales are ticking up ever so slightly. They're still down, though, like I said, from 2-3 years ago. Prices are holding steady, although they're not appreciating at the rate that they were. And most people are realizing close to asking price. And maybe what I've done at this point, Angela, is I've pulled that data for
Absolutely.
resale exclusively just to
Yes.
see how it compares.
Yep.
Okay, guys, let's keep going and hold your questions for just a second, because what I want to do is get even more narrow for you, and let's look specifically at your competition. So here's what I've done. You guys have a 5-bedroom, 3-bath, 1,500 square foot property. So I've pulled all the comparables in Grimes for you in that 4 to 6 bedroom range, 2 to 4 baths, and I've got them here in a pile. So we can look at them if we want to in a minute. And obviously, I've kept them in the newer range, 2018 to 2023. I would consider this your active competition. And here's what I mean by that. If I'm a buyer or I'm representing a buyer and they're looking for a house like yours, these are the ones they're going to be looking at as well. And so here's what we see when we take a look at this local competition. There's really only 4 right now that are showing up. And again, just for reference point, this was an actual listing of yours from when? November?
We were listed in November. I ran in November. This was an update that I gave her for a seller update in December.
Okay. So at that point, and again, I'm just seeing this data now an hour ago for the first time, but the narrative would be, it looks like what we've got is 4 specific properties that we're competing with in this price point. Here they are. And because there's only 4, I'd probably just pull them out on the table. I'd say,
Yeah.
here's 1, 2, 3, and 4.
Yep.
And what I can tell you about these is that the average number of days that these have been on the market, they've been sitting around 127 days. So that's a really, really important piece of information for us because, and I'm going to scroll to the bottom here, scroll to the bottom of the page.
Yeah.
Like right now, I'd jump in and I'd say, see this curve at the bottom left? Right now, we're sitting in November, December, because this is when this conversation had, right?
Yep.
And I'd say, so what we're dealing with is a low number of competitors, but in a market where sales are going down into the winter months, and the ones that are actively available, they've all been sitting around since the middle of the summer. Back to our data. The other thing we know is, and this is good news, that we have had 5 sell in the last 12 months. So really, we have about 4 in the market right now. There's 5 that have sold, and those on average took about 234 days. So guys, this isn't great news for us. What this is telling me already is that as we think about pricing, we need to understand that it's going to take a little bit of time to market and sell our property. Unless, of course, we really want to price aggressively. But if we want to realize that price that we need to give the market time, because there's really only about 5 in this price point moving per year. The sold absorption rate. I'm confused by that data point there, Angela.
Average number of properties sold in the last per month. So
Uh,
because of 5, only 0.4 are really selling. Like a
yeah,
whole property is not selling per month.
I actually don't like that title. I wouldn't call that the sold absorption rate. I think that one might have changed over the last couple of years.
Yeah.
But that's our rate of sale, right? That's sold per month.
Yes.
So what this tells us is that we're only selling four
Not even a
tenths
whole
of a property every month. And that's important again. So guys, here's the number that I want to zoom in on real quick for you. And that's going to be our absorption rate. I want you to remember that nationally, we're up to about a 3.3 month supply right now. And I told you that in our price point in DMAR, we're sitting around a 2.2 month supply. Where we're at right now for your property is about a 9.6 month supply. And what that means is at the current rate of sale, it would take 9.5 months for just the 4 properties that we currently have to be bought up because we're only selling half a property per month. So this isn't bad data. It's just the reality of anyone entering the market in your type of property in the market that we're in right now. The one more data point I want to give you as we move forward in our conversation, and that's just going to be these 4 properties that I have in this other pile. And these are going to be actually properties that were listed throughout the last 12 months that terminated their listing. So these expired or actually were pulled off the market at some point because they weren't successful in selling their properties. And obviously, what we want to do right now is we look at the active comps, and as we look at these other comps, we just want to be very intentional about thinking about where we want to position our property to ensure that we're one of the solds and not one of these sitting. I got one more thing I want to show you real quick, and then I want to open this up to a discussion with you guys about what you think and any questions you have. And that's just sort of the timeline of the next 90 days. So based upon the data we've got, we know we've got these four that we're actively competing with. We also know that for this period of time during the year, and it's a little slower now than it is in the summer, but for the next 90 days, we can project that there's going to be about 3 new active listings that come on as well. And maybe you want to explain how you pulled that data, but it would just be based upon the active number of listings that occur at that time of year on average.
Yep.
And so what that means is that in the next 90 days, and for the record, the reason I picked 90 days is because that would be a reasonable amount of time in which to try and get the property in the market based upon, first of all, your timeline that you've told me, but also knowing that if we sit too much longer than that, the property starts to lose some of its appeal in the marketplace and become stale. But in the next 90 days, we've got the 4. We expect 3 more to come on, which really means we're going to be competing with about 7 other listings at some point during our marketing phase. Based upon the rate of sale that we've got, we know that about 1 to 1.5 of those are going to sell, which means there's going to be about 5 to 6 that will still be on the market 90 days from now. And again, the big decision that we've got to make is, where do we want to position the property so that we are one of those 2 properties that sells, so we can get you guys on your way to Texas. Okay, that's a lot of data that I've given you. I'm going to put my mouth on pause for a second and just open this up to you guys. That's a lot of information. What jumped out to you? What immediate reaction do you have to just that information? And based upon that, maybe there's a number already that's rolling around in your head. What's your mindset right now about where you think we need to position the property relative to our competition, so that we can make sure you guys get to Texas by March when the grandkids are born?
Yep.
And then put the pen down, shut up. Okay, I think that's the story. How'd I do?
That was really good. But the one powerful piece of this, as the continuation of the conversation goes, I think is re-referencing that 9.5 month supply. And I'm going to share this one more time because it's really impactful. These statements are super impactful for continuing the conversation. So 9.5 month supply, as you're then looking at the pieces of paper or the pictures on the MLS, whatever you're doing, and going through these other competitors, remembering that 9.5, the recommendation is that we'd want to be about 10% below. I mean, to be aggressive and to position really well, we want to potentially price 10% below what the other competition is doing. And I think those phrases for me have been super impactful in continuing to tell that story to them, to continue the positioning conversation, and not like, I'm telling you a price.
Yeah, I think of that as it's a really helpful little guide, right?
Yeah.
We always want to be careful, one, not to just present a price and be priced
Yep.
out of the conversation because
Yep.
somebody else is buying the listing. We also don't want to enter into a confrontational, like this context right here. The emotion that the seller is going to feel at this point isn't a good emotion.
No,
They're wrestling, but that's some of the conversation. Some of them, you're like, man, we have a 1 month supply. It
yeah.
looks like we've got 50 competitors, but we're selling like 60 a month. Really, the game we're going to be playing is, how do we position this to deal with these multiple offers?
Yes.
That's the beauty of this. But in this context, the reality is that they're now wrestling through this. And what I think is super important is that we're not the source of the confrontation. We're deliberating with them now on the properties. And
But
that's why
it's
I like to lay the properties out.
yeah,
Our,
same.
our, I'm the consultant. This data is our challenge, and we're going to together work on solving this problem. So the only thing I'd add to that is that pricing guide. I think it's great to pull that out once, maybe. I think I would like to hear their thoughts and then
Yes.
say, hey, I hear you. It
Yes.
sounds like you were hoping to realize this range here. Here's one thing to consider. Based on this comp, and this comp, which really aren't comps, they're your competition.
Yep.
We're going to be competing with these for this 1 or 2 buyers. Based on that, what I'm hearing you say is you would be positioning yours higher than all of those. And one thing I want you to look at here is just this general pricing guide. It's not a
Yep.
rule, it's just
Yep.
an idea, but it makes sense intuitively. If we're at a 9 month supply, we really need to ensure that we're positioned ahead of all of
More
our competitors.
aggressively, yes.
And then I
Uh-huh.
would say something like, what that would mean is that the price you need to be in is actually more in this range to ensure that buyers pick yours and not theirs. How do you feel about that idea?
Mhm.
And again, I'm not the problem here, right?
Right.
And I think that we just need to open up the opportunity for them to wrestle. It's almost like the stages of grief
Right.
in that
So yes.
context.
Yeah.
But it's
And then
it's
and then again, like you said, it's a conversation. We're going back and forth and not arguing in an argumentative way. We're just kind of working through making this plan together to most strategically position their home to get it sold in the time that they want. Like that's what we're doing together.
And we all know the things they're going to say. Yeah, but I have a glow in the dark basement. Yeah, I added this and I fixed the countertops. And and then we don't want to be adversarial. We say, hey, you know what? The countertops are beautiful. I can't tell you how good you do the work yourself. I really think that those are going to be a feature. One thing to consider is that these other three that we're competing with, these are actually newer than yours that already had nice countertops. And
Yeah.
so again, that's the journey. But what we've done here is we've created a context where we can enter into that conversation with them now on the same side of the table rather
Yes.
than on the opposite.
Yeah. Yeah, and like I said, I just want to reiterate how impactful this has been for my ability to go in with confidence, to have good conversations, to have good consultations where I've never felt adversarial with my clients, but more we are in this together. Let's make a plan that's going to best do this. I also like using this, like I did for my client. I use this as a seller update. So occasionally I will update this if we're still sitting on the market. I've even done like a loom style go through it, talk through it on looms because it is a lot of data. I would not want to ever really send this piece of paper without being able to
No, it,
contextualize it. Not meant to be a just send and hope they can figure it out kind of piece of paper. Yeah.
yeah. I'm trying to imagine the shortest, the most brief version of this that you can construct. And I think that we all need to rehearse and
Yeah.
practice and work on this as a skill set because on the range of humans, there's hour-long versions of this conversation. There's no question. They're going to keep interrupting. They're going to ask questions. And frankly, if they're like that, go with it. Like
Yeah.
this is what they want. They want
Yeah.
to break it apart and analyze it. And then you're going to get the other people that really do just, they already know what they want to list the price, the property for, and maybe the situation that they're in validates that.
Yeah.
I think becoming a master at telling the story, somewhere between like 3 stories and 100 stories of elevator time,
Yep.
that's a skill that you need to work on.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, again, I thank you for doing this with me today. I've been wanting to get this recorded in some way, how to have everybody hear you tell this story from top to bottom. So if everyone finds this helpful, I do imagine people listening to this over and over again. And again, it takes rehearsal time, takes practice. I like that you just said too, there's short and long versions of this too. So be prepared for all of those scenarios. So thank you so much for your time. And I'm glad we got this done.
Yeah, love that you've got so much benefit over this. If I ever bump into Michael Kinder or Reese, I'll shoot them a high five for our team because it's
Yeah.
been valuable. But good luck,
Super great.
everyone.
Thanks.